If you're enjoying Haunted UK fiction, please consider supporting the show on Patreon or Ko-fi. Simply search for Haunted UK Podcast. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, or has forgotten the old stories, Nixie is a shape-shifting water spirit. She appears as a beautiful maiden and will lure children into the dark water, never to be seen again. Hello and welcome, dear listeners, to Haunted UK Fiction, a sister podcast to the Haunted UK, which features original flash fiction, short stories and novellas with paranormal themes. All stories you will hear were written by a collection of talented writers, authors and storytellers, both independent and professional. In today's April Fool's special episode, we'll be reading The Nixie, which was sent in to us by Edward Wilcox, a performance storyteller who also writes original stories. Don't get too comfortable. Grab a little something caffeinated to sip on. Stay on guard, because anything can happen on April the 1st. So let's dive into the story. Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, there stood a dark forest, and within that forest, there was a village which surrounded a lake full of fish. The villagers led a simple, peaceful life. They cared for the forest, made offerings to the woodland folk, and every child in the village was taught never to anger the Nixie that lived in the lake. Now, for anyone who doesn't know or has forgotten the old stories, Nixie is a shape-shifting water spirit. She appears as a beautiful maiden and would lure children into the dark water, never to be seen again. One day, some engineers arrived in the village carrying maps and tools. They held meetings, made plans, and announced to everyone, "We're going to bring electricity into your homes." "Hooray!" shouted the villagers, and everyone smiled. Time passed slowly in the village. Crops were sown. Spring became summer, which turned to autumn. And then it happened. The engineers returned, bringing iron and steel. They dug trenches and constructed huge metal pylons, as tall as the trees. The villagers stood open-mouthed as one of the pylons was erected right on the edge of the lake. A voice within the crowd shouted, "That won't be there for long." And indeed, the next morning, everyone saw the pylon had been pulled from the ground, the metal now twisted and crushed, as if a giant hand had reached down through the clouds and picked it up, just as you or I might pull an unsightly weed from a garden border. All the engineers looked at each other, scratched their heads, took away the mangled remains and set to work. The villagers watched as piece by piece the new pylon grew right on the edge of the lake. Once again, a voice within the crowd shouted, "That'll be gone by morning, you mark my words." And so it was. The very next morning, everyone in the village saw the pylon collapsed to the ground, the metal reduced to a pile of rust. The engineers all looked at each other, scratched their heads, and took away the pile of rusted metal. Then, "Hang on," asked one of the engineers. "Why are these pylons being destroyed?" "Oh," came a voice from the crowd. "You must go and speak to the wise woman. She lives at the edge of the dark forest. She can answer your question." The engineers all looked at each other, scratched their heads, put down their tools and marched off into the dark forest. That afternoon they came upon a small, rickety house. Outside on a wooden stool sat the wise woman, knitting a new scarf, for winter was approaching and it can be very cold in the dark forest. Putting down her knitting, she reached out, gesturing with long, bony fingers, and asked, "Why are you here?" The engineers all looked at each other, scratched their heads and spoke, "Wise woman, please help us. We've come to the village to bring people electricity. We've placed 2 pylons at the edge of the lake, and both have been destroyed during the night. What must we do?" The wise woman looked thoughtfully at them, then spoke, "You've angered the Nixie, the water spirit. Return to the lake and make an offering to her. Only then will she leave you in peace." The engineers all looked at each other, scratched their heads, and thanked the wise woman before marching out of the forest. The next day they returned to the village, bringing more iron and steel. Once again the villagers stood in a circle watching as the new pylon was positioned right at the edge of the lake. The engineers all looked at each other, scratched their heads, and shouted, "This is for you, Nixie," as a box containing the latest Samsung 65-inch Neo QLED 8K smart television flew high into the air before hitting the water with a splash. In a land far, far away stands a dark forest, and within the forest there's a village which surrounds a lake full of fish, and as far as we know, that electricity pylon is still there. We truly hope you enjoyed this not exactly spooky but giggle-inducing April Fool's special. If you'd like to hear more from Edward Wilcox, social media handles are available in the show's notes. If you have an original story that would send a chill down our spines and you would like to submit it for review, simply send it in to HauntedUKfiction@hotmail.com. Until next time, stay safe and take care.